I often hear people speculate and raise questions about whether AI would be conscious one day. This is one of the most confused topics today. I think it's very similar to medieval discourse on God. It is just as confused and full of bullshit as medieval discourse was on issues about God's existence. We basically don't know what we're talking about here. We don't know what we mean by simulation. We don't know what we mean by computation. We don't know what we mean by something being a computer in the first place. We don't know what symbols are. We don't know what symbol manipulation is. I mean, in the general discourse here, let alone consciousness. I think the definition here is also extremely murky. And I can't address all of those issues, but let's focus on one which I basically never hear people mention and speak about. We often measure consciousness in terms of what we as conscious agents can do. For example, human beings can play chess. And then we usually take that activity to be an expression of consciousness. So if you can build a machine which is capable of playing chess, it has led many people to believe that this is somehow related to consciousness itself. And the mistake that we're making here is that we think the activity itself to be an expression of consciousness, while it is something that we use consciousness for to achieve it, to do it, but it itself is not consciousness-like. Take the ability to play chess, something I think we all can understand. How does a human being learn to play chess? Well, the main point is the way we do it through consciousness, that we learn how to play chess, is not that we memorize all possible combinations on the chess field. But whenever we see us losing a game by a specific combination of moves, that doesn't feel right to us. In other words, we have a sense, we have an appetite, or the opposite of appetite. We have some form of, if we feel repulsed, if you want. This basic distinction between appetite and repulsion is at work here. And this is typically something consciousness-like, the distinction between appetite and repulsion, right? And we use that to learn what moves are good, which are an expression of appetite, so it draws you towards doing them, and which moves are bad, right? Which moves repulse us. This is the way we learn to speak as well. We don't just produce meaningful or meaningless language, but to us it always makes a difference. Meaningful sentences we have an appetite for. We literally want to fall into a meaningful sentence. It feels different from producing a meaningless sentence. Meaningless sentences repulse us, they push us away. This is how we use consciousness to learn making distinctions that machines are capable of making. But a machine doesn't learn in this way. A machine doesn't learn that losing the game is something that's repulsive, and then you have to try a different path to win the next game. This is not how machines learn. We learn by, again, the moment you make a mistake, you feel repulsed by it. It's pushing you away. The moment you do something right, and it's something you can already observe in children, you have a sense for, hey, I want to stick with this moment. This is one of the most basic features of consciousness. And the moment we are confronted with a creature that shows that expresses a sense of appetite, that it's striving towards something, and repulsed of something else, we are reminded of our, own experience, are reminded of the most basic form of experience that is within human consciousness. Now, with the help of that experience, that distinction between repulsion, and appetite, we are capable of doing things that themselves are not inherently consciousness-like. They don't involve consciousness as consciousness, but we use our consciousness to perform them. And this is the big confusion, because people, even with large language models today, assume that just because something can produce meaningful sentences, this somehow involves consciousness. It doesn't. There are different ways to get to meaningful sentences. The way we do get to meaningful sentences, again, just observe how children do. There is nothing that forces their brains to use language in a proper manner, but they develop a sense for what you say, what feels right to say, and what doesn't feel right to say. You could never say that about a machine. You could never say about a computer, to a computer, it doesn't feel right to say that 2 and 2 equals 4, or that it does feel right to say that 2 and 2 equals 4. To us, it does. Whenever we make statements about reality, whenever we make any kind of intelligent utterance, it has always assumed that something feels right or something doesn't feel right. Something feels right to say, something feels right to do, something feels right to look at, to observe, and something feels repulsive. That's the foundational distinction, which itself is consciousness-like, and is then used and applied in all kinds of areas to learn and develop. And human intelligence, by following this principle, is relatively stupid. I mean, if I were asked to identify, you give me a picture and I have to identify all the different patterns that are in it, with this experience-based learning, of course, it would take me ages to even start seeing basic shapes and shades and distinguishing them and relating them to each other, because each and every time I would have to actually to consciously experience, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is something I want to stick with. I want to keep that connection. Oh no, this doesn't make sense, right? Same way you learn music. When you learn playing the piano, what you do is you have to use your sense of, oh, this feels right. I have an appetite for it. In opposition to, oh, this doesn't feel right, right? And you start with intervals, you start with simple melodies, then you can build chord progressions, but every single step of learning is always a step in which you feel that either something feels right or something feels wrong. There is no step in which this experience itself is not already there all the time. You can learn to play tennis, the same thing. It feels right to hit the ball in a specific way. It doesn't feel right to hit it in a specific way. The learning process itself manifests itself for us, again, as the experience of appetite and repulsion in any kind of learning domain that you can think of. It's always there. And none of that you need when you want, for example, to make a software learn something. Because the learning experience here, there is no learning experience, but if you want the reinforcement, the telling the machine that it should do something and not do something else, it is itself a purely mechanistic process. It's something that does not involve this sense, this felt experience of, ooh, this feels right, ooh, this doesn't feel right. Never. It never does. It's something that's written into stone. And this is one of the biggest confusions, because by overlooking this, we generally tend to think that everything that can simulate human behavior, typically human behavior, stuff that humans do and animals don't do, or more simple organisms don't do, anything that we can do, the moment you can simulate it and behaviorally like create something that behaves in a similar way, we then jumped back to thinking that, oh, this implies that it has in some way to be related to consciousness, if not be an expression of consciousness. And that's just not the case. I'm sorry. Human consciousness is, in a sense, much more stupid than most of our simulations are, because they have far more input than we are ever capable of including in our perspectives. But they never involve this most foundational, very simple distinction between feeling appetite, feeling drawn towards something, something feeling right, and something not feeling right? And it's something that's so it's so close to ourselves that we don't even notice it. We don't even think of it as something special, but it is something special. Um, if you couldn't make that distinction between something feeling right and something not feeling right, you would never have been able to learn to speak. You would never have been able to even walk, to even move in meaningful ways within space. Your bodily experience, your bodily expression in space is all also tied to this distinction. Something feels right, this is how you walk, and this is not how you walk. This is at the heart of pretty much everything that is part of human conscious life and conscious learning. And that distinction itself doesn't even make sense. Even you wouldn't even know how to express it when we were to apply it to machines. Like, in what sense would it make a difference to a machine, whether it's in state A or state B? A machine is nothing but a sequence of different states, which we human beings then interpret. That's what a machine are. That's what a machine is. A machine is basically a symbol manipulation tool, but those symbols themselves, they are not meaningful to themselves. They're meaningful to somebody who uses them. But the symbols and the sequence of symbols itself is something that's dead. It's something that's written into stone and doesn't even allow for the possibility of there being someone feeling like, ooh, this is the right way of combining symbols. Ooh, this is not the right way of combining symbols. That distinction doesn't even make sense in terms of computer language. Well, this is tricky stuff because our confusions are on so many levels. The complexity of the whole issue is so big that we fail even with the most simple questions. Again, like as Searle once put it, most people don't even understand what a computer is, even and including many engineers and many people who are dealing with computers every day. At the heart of it, most of our understanding of computers for most people, is actually a form of animistic projection, which has nothing to do with what the thing actually is. As Searle once put it, a computer actually becomes a computer once a human being uses it, because it is in the definition, it is a symbol manipulation tool, which simply means that a symbol is something that has a meaning, but not independently of the observer, of someone who ascribes meaning to it. That's what a symbol is. A symbol doesn't have an inherent meaning in it. It gains meaning the moment you have an observer, someone who places a meaning on it. And this is exactly what computers are. Computers are symbol manipulating tools, but they themselves are not the thing that sees itself as a symbol. They are just symbols. They are not symbol recognizing, if you want, symbols. But it's a different... oh man, I got distracted here, but I just wanted to point out how tricky the whole matter is and how extremely confused the whole dialogue is. And it is at the heart of it, it's just an expression of how self-forgotten we are. As Fichte once put it, I mean, people would rather think of themselves of being a rock on the moon, something that's very distant and very foreign and very different, than realizing what they are as selves, than realizing their own nature as conscious creatures. And this is a really weird phenomenon because it's not a question of knowing and not knowing things. It's not a question of intelligence. It's not a question of thinking the right thoughts and not thinking the right thoughts. It is a question of self-awareness, which is kind of different from just knowledge about the world. And I can't pin it down. I don't know why there is such a distinction, because you would think that the more you learn about the world, the more you should know about consciousness, but this is not the case. It is as if this is a different form of activity of mind that is necessitated to grasp what you actually are as a conscious creature. It's not something that you can learn by just thinking. You have to do a very specific kind of thinking. This is really weird. Yeah, but I got sidetracked here.